Tap your card for the mortgage, the groceries, the power bill. 3 different companies, 3 different logos, and yet the money lands in the same place. It just isn't here. You thought you were the customer. You were never the customer. You were the revenue line, a number on a spreadsheet that gets totaled up once a year and posted to a retirement account on the warm side of the Tasman. I want you to sit with that for a second, because it changes everything about how the bill feels. When you tap that card, you think you are buying a thing. Bread. Interest. Electrons. Except for the company on the other end, you are not buying anything. You are producing something. You are producing a dividend. And that dividend has a passport, which is the whole problem, because it is not a New Zealand one. Here is the number that pays the title off. In the single year to March 2025, foreign owners drew about $28.8 billion out of this country in dividends and interest. That is the official Stats NZ balance of payments figure, not a vibe. 28.8 billion, gone, in 1 year. To put that in scale, that single year's outflow is about the same, in raw dollars, as the roughly 24 billion the Crown collected from the asset sales that began 35 years ago. Now be fair about it. Adjust those old sales for inflation, and they are worth closer to 50 billion in today's money. So in real terms, the family silver fetched more than 1 year of the pipe. But sit with the fact that we are even in the same conversation, because that fire sale took multiple decades to drain, whereas the dividend pipe now moves something like that out the door every single year. So let me show you the pipe, let me show you the 4 taps it feeds from, because here is the catch: you use all 4, probably before lunch. Tap 1 is your bank, the 4 big banks every Kiwi uses, ANZ, ASB, BNZ and Westpac, are each 100% Australian owned. Not mostly. Not a controlling stake. All of it. ANZ belongs to a Melbourne parent, ASB to Commonwealth Bank in Sydney, BNZ to National Australia Bank in Melbourne, Westpac to Westpac in Sydney. Between them, they hold around 90% of the country's banking assets and about 84% of its lending. So when the Commerce Commission looked at that, it reached for a polite regulator word: oligopoly. A stable, 2-tier oligopoly that, and I quote the spirit of it, does not face strong competition. And here is the part that should make your jaw tighten. The Commerce Commission found that every single one of those New Zealand subsidiaries earns a higher return on equity than its own Australian parent. Same bank, same brand, same shareholders, and yet it makes more money squeezing you than it does squeezing an Australian. When the regulator asked them why, the banks could not adequately explain it. Sit with that phrasing, because it means the most profitable companies in the country are charging you premium rates, and they cannot tell the watchdog where the extra money comes from. That premium adds up. In 2024, the whole banking sector booked a record net profit after tax of $7.22 billion. ANZ alone made over $2 billion, which makes it the single most profitable business operating in New Zealand. The 4 Australian-owned majors together cleared about $6.5 billion. To see how lopsided that is more than the entire rest of the Deloitte Top 200, every other big company in the country added together, which managed about $6 billion. 4 banks, therefore, out-earning the next 200 firms combined. And then, once the Reserve Bank lifted the COVID-era restrictions, they shipped roughly $4.2 billion of dividends straight back across the Tasman in a year. Tap 2 is the supermarket, and here is where I have to be honest with you, because cheap shots make bad facts. The grocery market is a duopoly, foodstuffs, and the Australian-owned Woolworths, holding somewhere between 82 and 90% of the market between them. But only half of that is the offshore villain. Foodstuffs is a New Zealand cooperative. It has no external shareholders, so its surplus stays onshore, which means it has no dividends to repatriate. The dollar that actually leaves the country is the Woolworths dollar, flowing to Woolworths Group shareholders in Australia. The ownership is split, and yet the squeeze is shared by the whole duopoly, and the squeeze is real. The Commerce Commission's grocery study found the pair were earning about a 12.9% return on capital, when a normal return would be around 5.5%. In plain terms, that means combined profit would fall by about $430 million a year, over $1 million a day, if they simply earned a normal margin instead of a duopoly one. That is the cheese tax. That is why a block of cheddar feels like a luxury good. Cheese was up about 30% in a year, coffee up 25%, eggs up 18%. So no, your weekly shop is not imagining it. Tap 3 is the power bill, and you would think electricity is at least ours. Some of it is. But Powerco, the country's second-largest electricity and gas distributor, is owned by Australian funds, including Superfund Capital, money managed for Australian retirements. Wellington's lines are Hong Kong-owned, so the wires the electrons travel down to reach your kettle are, in large part, somebody else's pension asset. And that is the quiet engine of this whole thing. Powerco's owners are Australian funds, including the Australian Retirement Trust, which means that one is literally pension money running our wires. The banks are a step removed, owned by big listed parents in Australia, and their shareholders include Australian super funds among many others. Either way, when you tap your card, a slice of that mortgage payment, that grocery margin, that power bill, flows to shareholders across the Tasman, and a real chunk of them are somebody's retirement fund. So you are paying into a retirement scheme, you are just not in it. Right, if you are still with me and quietly furious, that is the correct response. And it is also the cheapest possible moment to hit subscribe, because the next few minutes are about how the prices got this high in the first place, and the answer is worse than inflation. Because here is the trick they pulled at home, with our own central bank. In 2020, the Reserve Bank, our Reserve Bank, printed and pumped somewhere around $72 to $74 billion into the system. Roughly 53 to 55 billion of that was quantitative easing, buying up government bonds, and another 19 billion was cut price funding handed to the banks. The official cash rate was pinned at an emergency 0.25%. As a result, the balance sheet of the bank ballooned from about 24 billion before all this to a peak of over 104 billion. That money did not spread out evenly across the economy like a nice warm blanket. Instead, it flooded into one thing: houses. National house prices jumped about 34% in 18 months, while wages crawled along in the low single digits. So if you already owned a house, you woke up richer every morning for doing absolutely nothing. But if you were renting, saving, trying to claw together a deposit, that deposit just sprinted away from you, funded by the very institution that is meant to keep things stable. Then the bank panicked and slammed the brakes. The cash rate went from 0.25% to 5.5% in the fastest tightening in modern New Zealand history. So house prices fell about 18% nationally, 27% in Wellington, and every recent buyer who stretched to get in at the top got torched. The boom was privatised to people who already owned the assets. The bust, by contrast, was socialised to everyone with a payslip and a mortgage. And the bond losses from all that money printing came to roughly $10.5 billion, about 3.2% of GDP, which means that under an indemnity, the Crown, you, the taxpayer, is on the hook for the losses themselves. Now, in fairness, the Reserve Bank's own 2025 research argues the easing did not really cause the inflation peak, and that higher tax takings during the pandemic almost entirely covered the bond losses. That is their defense, and you should hear it. But notice what the defense does not touch. It does not undo the 34% house price surge. It does not give the renter back the deposit that ran away. The wealth had already moved. And it moved in one direction. In the 3 years to June 2024, the housing market manufactured roughly $130,000 of extra median household wealth. Median net worth went from $399,000 in the year to June 2021 to $529,000 in the year to June 2024. Sounds like a rising tide lifting all boats until you read the small print. Real estate's share of household assets climbed from 43% to 48%. The bottom two wealth groups, by contrast, showed no statistically significant change at all. On the indicative figures, a mortgage-free homeowner now sits on something like 10 times a renter's wealth. The under 35s, median net worth somewhere between $4,000 and $34,000, got nothing real. So the single biggest wealth event of the decade was a closed shop, and the price of admission was a house you already owned. And remember, that snapshot ends in 2024, before prices fell back, so for anyone who bought near the top, the paper gain has since gone the other way. So what does a young, broke working person do when the maths is that rigged? They look at the wage gap. Average Australian pay is substantially higher, on some measures 30 to 60%, depending on whether you measure raw dollars, the exchange rate, or real buying power. By the rough estimates, after tax, a Sydney worker takes home around $1,440 Australian dollars a week, against about $1,000 in Auckland. And so they leave. In 2024, a record 128,700 people departed, a record net loss of 47,100 citizens, and 38% of the leavers were aged 18 to 30. So the pipe does not just send our dividends to Australia, it sends our kids. I will be honest, because this channel lives or dies on being honest, Sydney is dearer. Rents there can be much higher, and the paper house wealth has since fallen around 30% in real terms, so some of that boom is quietly evaporating. The picture is not a cartoon. And yet the felt thing, the gut thing, survives every honest caveat. Your pay went up about 32% since 2020. Prices went up about a quarter. So far so even, except real per capita disposable income actually fell about 2.5% across part of that window. And the Reserve Bank itself admits the country has slid from 95% of the average rich country income down to 90%, with productivity gone negative. You ran faster and ended up further back. That is the whole magic trick in one line. The wage rise was real on paper, but a mirage in your hand, because the gains were diluted across record migration and devoured by the two costs that matter most when you are stretched: food and shelter. So the next time you tap your card 3 times before lunch, picture the pipe. Picture the dividend boarding a plane at Auckland Airport with a one-way ticket and a comfortable retirement waiting in Queensland. You were told you were a customer. You were told you were a homeowner in waiting. You were told the wage rise meant you were winning. But you were the revenue line. And down here at the bottom of the world, at the far end of the pipe, all we ever get to keep is the bill.